What's up, guys and gals of the movement world? Sean Mishka, the Movement Miyagi, coming to you once again on behalf of Football Beyond the Stats as we continue our deep dive into the 2022 Mover of the Year, Travis Kelce, tight end of the Kansas City Chiefs. And we once again find ourselves on Sunday Night Football, and we're beginning to see a trend here. When we talk about dexterity and we talk about performing under the brightest lights, Travis Kelce is an individual who shows out, and obviously his skill and how solidified, stable, but also flexible and adaptable it is responsible for allowing him to do that under the brightest of lights. We find here the Kansas City Chiefs once again at home, once again on their home field and under the stadium that is the Kansas City Chiefs fans, maybe arguably the best, at least the loudest in all the National Football League. And of course, I know that some fans in some cities are going to argue with me on that. But if you've ever been in the Kansas City Chiefs home stadium, particularly in a primetime game, you probably would agree with me. And what we find them up here against at this Sunday Night Football matchup in Week 8 is the Tennessee Titans, both teams at 5-2. This play early in the first quarter, we're going to see a couple of different things. We're going to look into two plays here from Travis Kelce on this Sunday night game as he was en route to a 106-yard performance. When we see him in these bubble screen type of fashions, particularly when he has teammates in front of him, a convoy in front of him, we're going to see some tendencies from his movement behavior. We're going to see how he perceives the world. We're going to see how he intends to act within the world. And remember, when I say intentions, I'm talking about one's openness and responsiveness to a rich landscape of affordances, per Kiverstein and Reitfeld and skilled intentionality. But we're also talking about explicitly the intentions, the decisions one makes, the thoughts, the aims to act in a given way based on the perception and information detection of information that is out there. So on these bubble screens, as we watch this at 100% speed, and we see some nifty stuff that he does that we don't see a lot of other tight ends in the league doing, we're going to be able to dissect what he does and how he does it, but we're also going to be able to investigate what he might be able to do slightly differently to come up with or coordinate, control, and organize a solution that is more functional, maybe more adaptable, maybe has diversity, as we're kind of culminating into what would happen if Travis Kelce and I ever partnered together. So now as we've watched it through at 100% speed, this first play, and like I said, we're going to get into two that took place at different times in the game. But let's look at some things that he might be attuning to and adapting around, particularly how he might be intending to act and how he might be able to intend to act differently, which obviously will channel the emergence of a different or variable movement solution. First, right off the bat, one thing I want to mention is when he squares up with a guy when he's not moving very quickly, here's one weakness, here's one gap that I would love to see him work on. And it really isn't even just when he's squared up and one guy is moving at him fast and he's not moving at all, but really in many cases, he could have just turned and seen a guy and picked them up and they're not moving and he's not moving. He's not overly sensitive to interpersonal distance and what it affords to him. This is why he sometimes gets a little tight, a little close, and guys get their hands on him, and he's required, channeled into acting in a strength or power-oriented fashion. Maybe he tries to truck them. He puts out that stiff arm that we've seen him utilize before in some of other deep dive videos. He also might get a little fixed and frozen. Think back to some of the criticism I've had for Saquon Barkley back in the spring. This interpersonal distance sensitivity is a place that I would love to see him really become more sensitive and attuned to, meaning more sensitive to what it is specifying to him, and that he were able to layer in different information sources. It's not just about this interpersonal distance, but it would be about the gaps to the left or to the right of that immediate defender. It could be what's happening right behind that immediate defender, but while still remaining sensitive to interpersonal distance and how it might be changing. We're going to see right here that he does coordinate a functional movement solution, right? But what we're going to find in the play later is the movement solution lacks functionality, and it often does for him when this interpersonal distance should be highly specifying. So we see him square up with this guy and again resort to the stiff arm. Now, his stiff arm is sort of this go-to move that again is this distance keeper. Okay. It allows him to not have to be visually as connected perceptually as I would like to see him. And maybe think of a running back, a Nick Chubb, a Josh Jacobs. We could think about tight ends, George Kittle, who still has the ability in a Travis Kelce type of fashion to maybe go from this yin and yang, this ghost-like, elusive, evasive nature to this more strength-oriented, power-oriented strategy. I love to see guys being able to diversify their movement portfolio, if you will, be able to act in very distinct or different ways. But it's oftentimes in these situations that Kelce gets too fixated or focused on relying on this stiff arm. Particularly, like, let's think about where this guy is. And is this Armani Hooker, maybe? Whoever this individual is. Like right here, we look at this interpersonal distance. And this is 6.5 yards of separation between the two of them. And obviously, Kelce's moving slow and not very much on the gas pedal, whereas this defender is coming in hot, heavy, a defensive back who likely, in many cases, as Kelce is accustomed to, a guy going low and going at one's feet. Hence the reason that that stiff arm works as a distance keeper, but it also works as a movement strategy to fend that guy off and to layer or sequence another movement strategy off of it. And we're going to see that Kelce doesn't move very much where this interpersonal distance is closing. And now he is usually very sensitive to relative velocity values and bearing angles. But in this case, it's interpersonal distance, the distance changing, and the speed and the velocity of the player. So right here, if he were to be able to be really sensitive to that interpersonal distance and more sensitive to how quickly it's changing, he should act and act right away here in this case. Now, again, evasive agility scenarios and situations, I'm the first to tell you that it's not always about making the quickest decision or acting in the quickest of fashions. However, in this situation and case where this guy is closing ground quickly, as we can see, even though now he begins to break down, he being the defensive back, this is a prime opportunity with still 3-ish yards or so of interpersonal distance between the two for Kelce, if he were to act in a more tightly coupled fashion, to go right or left in a more adaptable way. Usually going to be maybe for a bigger dude like this, a speed cut, maybe a crossover cut, particularly in Kelce's case. We will sometimes see him do that crossover cut, maybe to, let's see if I can erase these. I will see him in this situation move from left to right. So as he plants this right foot, to let this left knee right here go right in that direction in a crossover type of fashion, and that would have been a functional movement solution potentially based on how this cat right here is coming in and coiling onto that right leg, though he may be able to move laterally, he being that defensive back, to move into this space. But again, it's all about the functionality. It's about the functional behavioral fit between the problem and the solver, between the problem and the solution that is emerging. There should be a closely connected relationship between them. It should be harmonious, if we want to think about it like that. But Kelce is just a little behind here. And now that guy takes 2 more steps, goes low on him to the near hip, and Kelce again resorts to that stiff arm. Now, obviously, this stiff arm works with high functionality. So this is sort of nitpicking right now, but you guys know as I dissect this and break this down, I'm always looking to ask what if? What else could have unfolded that might have represented a functional behavioral fit with that movement solution? And I could be wrong here because as he does move past him, as he does move past his defensive back, this chaser is also coming from behind. So again, I have the benefit of speculating and hypothesizing in retrospect. So I'm at an advantage here. This shit is happening quickly, as I have often told you guys. So it is up to the performer to organize and coordinate and control the movement solution that is calling for them or accepting the affordance that is calling for him. And here he loves space. Travis Kelce loves space, and he sees that there is some space afforded to him from the numbers to the sideline. But now we see him once he gets past this guy. And again, with that pant and stiff arm, he just uses that in a crossover type of fashion now to be able to move from right to left. And he gets himself reoriented with that dynamic balance that I've already alluded to, that is supreme and superior in comparison to all others. When he starts feeling himself, particularly when he puts somebody on his poster, we then see him almost like looking to move for movement's sake. And we see this from some other playmakers. Again, I hate to bring up the Saquon Barkley example, but somebody that I've often said that moves without actually organizing and coordinating that action in relation to what is there. But here, he is looking ahead for that next guy. What else is out there? What invitation is calling for me that would say that I might be able to put another guy on my poster? And I love that playmaker mentality from Travis Kelce. I love that authenticity. He's not sugarcoating the fact that he wants to put somebody on that poster. There are times like this when he coordinates a very novel, a very creative movement strategy and solution, particularly for a dude who's 6'5", 255. And this is slick. Again, particularly not only for a guy this big, but when you're going against a guy who is smaller in number 28, and maybe that's our money hooker. I'm trying to think of what number is our money hooker. I should probably have this information for you guys ahead of time. Either way, this is a defensive back, and he's going to go low, and Kelce is obviously going to sidestep him in this elongated to then tight type of jump cut in the open field. And it really isn't so much of a jump cut as it is a hesitation sidestep, but it doesn't matter what nomenclature we apply to it. It's just making this guy miss in a Barry Sanders type of fashion. To perfect the art of making someone miss is really what it's about. This is the guiding local intention at this moment. Make this guy miss, make him look silly, have him come up with nothing but thin air. And he does so here in that very tight stance, right? And he has to, because he's on the sideline. And with where 28 is coming down to the ground, that affordance is presented to him in a very unique way. I'm actually surprised he didn't stick the hand out, that right hand, in the stiff arm type of fashion, let him go to the ground and then cross over from left to right. I'm actually very surprised that didn't happen. But if he were to remain a little more sensitive in this case, he might again have organized this movement solution a little earlier. He would have executed this sidestep because he would have seen him a little earlier. Instead, he sees the flash late from 28 because he's looking too far ahead, and he actually could stand to scan quickly and then make the cut because he sees where 28 is. I mean, we look at this position from 28 right now. There's only one place and one place only that he's going. It's going to be low, or he's going to end up on the turf, which he does both of, right? And look at Kelce. There are some times when he executes this jump cut type of fashion, particularly in tight space as he is here, even though it's on the sideline. We see it in the middle of the field when he executes his jump cut. He will look down and lose attention briefly. And that brief loss of attention is where we could stand to increase his perceptual sensitivity to the behaviors of an opponent and the changing distance again, which might allow him, if he were to keep his head up as opposed to looking down at the ground here in sort of agility ladder or cone drill type of fashion, he might remain a little more attuned just a little longer, which could lead to adaptability to then take this cut and organize it in a way, because again, it would be unfolding earlier, quicker. He would execute that cut to where he might be able to move wider to the middle of the field, even though that's a far stretch. I'm going to be quite transparent and forthcoming with that. So instead, he just sequences into that strength and power oriented fashion. We talked about yin and yang before, being able to evade, elude somebody in an agile type of fashion, make somebody miss, make somebody look silly, and then make them look silly in a strength, power oriented way, a brute force type of fashion, often with the stiff arm, but also his trucking. And then somewhere in the between of that yin and yang, we sometimes find the novelty. We find the jump cuts, we find the hurdles, we find him leaping over someone, as we do here. And he's not afraid to leave his feet in these fashions. Now, this is a totally separate play, just a little bit longer into the game now that it's 3-0. And this wasn't the second play that I was going to look at, but it actually just allowed us to really discuss that aspect, that yin and yang of diversity. The more strategy someone has, that abundance will lead to adaptability, as I've said before, or the movement degeneracy, having more than one way to skin a cat, more than one way to solve a similar unfolding problem, will equate to dexterity, or the ability to solve any emerging movement problem. Let's go ahead and fast forward here now. And I'm going to get us to the other play that I was going to dive into, and we'll watch that one at full speed. And here it is. So even though we only have this from one view and we're going to miss some of the things that he did in the route, we now see the jump cut yet again. And the jump cut is executed in a fashion that is less functional. It's a similar unfolding problem, right? The defender coming at a slightly similar angle as to what happened on the sideline, but now obviously, there's a different space, there's a different chaser, there's space afforded to the right, there's something back behind. Remember, no two problems are ever the same, and no two solutions are ever the same. But again, he tries to force his way into a certain movement solution, as opposed to actually finding the most functional fit to that problem. And this is a place that I think if he and I were to partner together, as I will get into in our last video here today, what types of things would I really focus on? This is one of those areas, one of those categories. If he were to exist in more alive situations and scenarios, me as a facilitator attempting to educate his attention, try to nudge him into looking for new information sources, search for new information sources while I'm manipulating constraints and changing the positions of defenders. This would allow him to become more sensitive to picking up the right information at the right time that would inform him about the problem. I do see him in some cases, and this is one of the gaps, force his way into a movement strategy that isn't coordinated and controlled in a way that fits this problem. And that's what we see right here. Because, and again, I'm going to go in slow motion now after we've seen it a couple times at 50% or at 100%. Like, he is so adept at looking for space, but at the same time, he wants to put guys on his poster, as I made the mention earlier. And I think this just happens to be one of those cases. We will see him when he's in these scenarios, just turn to go for the first down. This is a global intention that he possesses, and it often works to his favor. He will almost always after receiving the ball, gain 2 or 3 or 4 yards and end up falling forward because he knows exactly where the first down is. He has this innate instinct, this ultra instinct oriented around this global intention of first down first. And there's something to be said about that because obviously he notches up first downs better than anybody in the entire league at any position. But there are also some times at that first down marker, and he's almost too oriented around it. This doesn't happen to be one of those cases, but that ability to and I don't want to use the word ability, that intention, that expectation, that desire to put somebody on his poster. We see it right here. He zeroes in on this guy. He knows he's got the first down based on how much space is afforded to him. So now he goes to try to make a play, which I'm all for. That's the authenticity that we're after, and that's what makes him who he is. So I don't want to rob him of that. But usually space calls for him so much that there's almost like a conflict of interest for him in this movement problem solving state of mind. As he turns and sees this guy, I can only imagine what is actually going on in his head, because usually we would see a Travis Kelce want to pull out all stops to get to that space, even with a number of chasing individuals. Now there's 28 again. A number of chasing individuals within that problem. So it's almost like, again, that yin and yang. We're seeing this balance here from him where he space or poster, space or poster. You like make the highlight play or run to the space. I can only imagine it was like probably angel and devil on his shoulder speaking to him here briefly as he goes into this movement strategy. Like, look, he acts in a way, and maybe this was done purposely for a deception purpose, to where he's trying to get 21 to move towards him and into that space. As I get my telestrator out here, I'm just going to draw for a while, right? So this might have been done deceptively in an intentional and purposeful fashion, or it could be that he started to move to the space and he felt 21 enter it, and the devil or the angel came in and said, hey, let's make this guy look silly, or attempt to. And we can see that next foot goes into the ground, his right foot goes forward, and he's not in a very effective position biomechanically to now be able to execute a jump cut. Like we would see a Jonathan Taylor, our mover of the year from 2021, execute this type of jump cut. We could see a Nick Chubb execute this type of jump cut. We could see maybe a Saquon Barkley. Again, those are all running backs, guys and gals. This is a guy who's 6'5", 255, and I love that he's trying to find this type of movement solution, that he's so willing to put himself out there. There is something to be harnessed there with that authenticity and that true abundance, okay? But it's not executed in a position or a place based on where 21 is and how 21 is moving that's going to lead to a functional movement solution now. And again, this defensive back just happens to not only go low, but he goes from low to high while still being in this interpersonal distance that Kelce wasn't very sensitive to. Okay, so hopefully that makes some sense. And I'm not trying to nitpick or criticize, but obviously this is an area that even the best mover, the most skillful and dexterous mover, that individual that is organizing the most functional movement solutions most often, from my perspective, still could stand to improve if he were to get more sensitive to some of those opportunities, some of those key candidate control parameters that could be speaking to him, that would inform him of the most functional opportunities, the most practical, the most useful, the most relevant movement opportunities at that moment in time. And now here we see the last highlight of the day. And I, again, wasn't going to get into this one, but we can see Travis Kelce in all of his glory, play in and play out on the biggest of stages, Again, I wanted to show you positive and negative, kind of yin and yang, as we mentioned, and that's sort of turned out to be a theme with this Week 8 matchup against the Titans. But the one thing that I want you guys to think about here is, and in Travis Kelce, if he were to ever be watching this, is the more degrees of freedom that you can begin to expose yourself to and become to experience, usually through more aliveness. But you have to really put yourself in this uncomfortable state and frame of mind as to how you might have been able to act, what else you could have done. So even in the cases when he is coordinating a functional movement solution, a movement solution that fits that problem, could he have solved it differently? And if the problem is tweaked or adjusted or changed in a repetition without repetition fashion, knowing that no two problems are ever the same, what else could have been done, or what else should the performer or mover have done to connect to that unique problem and coordinate and control a movement solution in their degrees of freedom, perceptually, intentionally, and from a motor and action system standpoint? How would we adjust the movement solution to fit the problem? These are all questions that we want to be asking ourselves as sport movement skill acquisition specialists or the player themselves. So the next time that they're presented with a problem that looks, feels, acts, and behaves slightly similar to that, they might have a plethora of movement strategies that fit that movement problem just a little bit more tightly. And in that tight coupling, would this be this behavioral fit that is matched to meet the needs? As my man Bernstein would say, a movement is correct when it perfectly fits the movement problem, just as the key easily opens a lock. So a movement strategy could still be functional, but not necessarily be representative of the most optimal, the most correct, or the most behaviorally functionally fit, if that makes sense. But nonetheless, Travis Kelce, our 2022 Mover of the Year. We're going to continue this deep dive into what he does right, what he might be able to work on heading forward, and how we might be able to tweak and adjust some things to make the most skillful and dexterous mover that much better. I hope you will continue on this little journey and thought experiment with me.